The hardest walk leads to the greatest destination. And what's our destination, brothers? The kingdom, man. The arms of Yahushua, man. The scriptures tell us in the Apocrypha, there's a day coming where Yahushua will place crowns upon the heads of the brothers that maintain their faith in him, that believed in him. He shall place crowns upon their heads. Ezra saw that, man. Our great forefather Ezra saw that in a vision. We want to be part of that group, man. We want to be one of those individuals receiving that crown from Yahushua. You know how great that is? I couldn't begin to possibly explain that in words. Words can't even explain the joy of that. Okay?
And when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away.
And what is our destiny? To be in this truth. Be in this truth and to make it to the end. As it is written, to finish the work. Like Yahushua said, I have finished the work. You know? The Apostle Paul said the same thing. Henceforth I know there's a crown of righteousness that is laid up for me. Okay, that is our destiny.
Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. The Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. And if children, then heirs of God, and joint heirs with God. If so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation, manifestation of the sons of God.
All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I would like to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem Kakwadash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great examples towards younger brothers. And peace and blessings and salutations to the hopeful lake out there pushing his word and truth and in sincerity across the four winds in the name of Yahweh Bahashem Al Shai, pushing to get up out of here. Shalom to the hopeful lake, the believers, the listeners, whom have came back to the obedience of the scriptures through faith in Yahweh Bashim Al Shai. All right. Now, what I want to get into today is a continuation in the book of 1 Corinthians. Okay. We made it to the 8th chapter. And this is a another controversial book. Okay. Dealing with sacrifices, offering to idols, which this was a situation that the believers, all right, of the Church of Corinth, were dealing with. All right, they had questions about it, and Apostle Paul, as the Spirit always leads them to do, brings balance, brings structure to the situation, brings, spirituality to the situation. Okay, and he deals, and give protocols and parameters, for dealing with it. Now, let's go here. Just want to do a quick overview. We'll come back to some more things. The beloved brother, Eliasha Wamba, recently went into this, because you got, these same clowns, that was all about the law. Okay. Now, they will always, use these writings, to say Paul was going off and, they use this to discredit, the ministry of Apostle Paul. This is one of the main things, that they use to miscredit, okay, the Apostle Paul's writings. Okay, and they made a response as of late, saying that Apostle Paul condoned idolatry, which is completely off. Okay, and just to go to a light overview, then we got some more things, some more history, to go into. Like I say, I'm just really going over things, that was brought out, by the beloved brother, Elias Wamba. Go to his page, Remnant Say 144. All right, and you'll see, his videos touching on this topic, about a week ago. Now, quick overview, it says main theme. It says Paul addresses whether it says Christians, but we're going to say the term believers. Okay. It said Paul addresses whether believers can eat food that has been offered to idols. The core issue is not just food, but how knowledge, love, freedom, and conscience interact within the community of believers. Okay, it says knowledge versus love. Paul begins with a contrast. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Some believers in current, okay, and like I said, we say believers instead of Christians. Try to use as much as possible because, you know, that Christian that Christian term is linked to madness, and really the believers of Yahweh they didn't call themselves that. Okay, they were just believers. Okay, they was Israelites. They followed Yahweh. Okay, whether they was the circumcision or the uncircumcised, they was believers that followed Yahweh. You know, Christianity just linked to so much madness. And Jake in Israel taking people back to Christianity. Okay, so you have just the true believers in Yahweh. Okay, it says some believers in current knew that idols are nothing and that there is only one true power. Their theology was correct, but their attitude, okay, was proud. Truth without love becomes destructive. Love must shape how we use, all right, our knowledge. So we're going to touch on that when we go and read the first couple of scriptures. How some Jake, they was mature enough to understand that idols, wasn't anything, and it didn't bother their conscience. Okay, and then knowing that they didn't have no consideration for their fellow believer who was, who wasn't as mature, who was weak in the faith, and it bothered their conscience dealing with certain foods and certain situations. Okay, so it says idols are nothing. All right, one power and one Lord. It said Paul confirms the theological point. There is one power, the Father, and one Lord, Yahweh HaMashiach. Therefore, idol food had no spiritual power in itself. It says point 3, not everyone has the same level of knowledge. Some believers have formerly been deeply involved in idol worship, and their conscience was still sensitive. To them, eating idol food still felt like participating in pagan worship. Spiritual maturity varies. What is morally neutral for one believer might feel sinful to another. Okay, so um, you had those believers that was fresh out of idol worship that was deeply into it, and their conscience, was still sensitive, to the concept of eating these foods, knowing, all right, the rituals and the backdrop of what was going on, with these foods. Okay, so they felt condemned, just by eating it. Okay, and it says, freedom must not harm others. Verses 8 through 12, it says, food doesn't make us more or less acceptable to the Most High. This is all lawful food that they're speaking of. They're not just eating anything. Okay, but you had a lot of lawful food that was sacrificed unto idols. Okay, in the Greco-Roman Empire, it said, but using freedom carelessly can cause a weak believer to stumble. Paul warns, if your freedom encourages someone else to violate their conscience, you're sinning against Hamashiach. So, um, let's go into it. All right. Um, so this is First Corinthians, okay, chapter 8 and verse 1. It said, now regarding your question about food, that has been offered to idols. Yes, we know that we all have knowledge about this issue, but while knowledge makes us feel important, it is love that strengthens the church. Okay? Anyone who claims to know all the answer doesn't really know very much, but the person who loves the Most High is the one whom the Most High recognizes. So you had, say believers, that were spiritually mature, and remember Paul is dealing with a church that's puffed up, okay, because the culture of current was deep into philosophy, okay, it was deeply into status and social status, and how much you knew, all right, that's how they would determine your status, okay, so there was an environment where a lot of men were puffed up. They came into the faith, puffed up from the world and thinking that, they already, had knowledge, and the truth was just more knowledge added to them, and they was proud. They would still move from an era, from a stance of pride. Okay. So Apostle Paul, all right, was letting them know that knowledge without love, okay, that ain't true knowledge. Okay. Being considerate. See, you can understand deep things, but if you're not, you don't have the consideration, okay, for your fellow brother, you see, then your knowledge, your wisdom is not rooted in love. Okay. It says, so what about eating meats that have been offered to idols? Well, we all know that an idol is not really a God and that there is only one power. All right. So when you go from there, okay, I'm saying this is lawful food that they're speaking of. Okay. So now he's addressing, eating foods, offered to idols. Okay. And he's making the point, all right, that there's only one power, that first of all, the idols are not real. Okay. You see, I think that's you go to Psalms 24. There's another one in let's go here, Psalms 24. Yep, Psalms 24 and 1. It said, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The world and all its people belong to him. All right. So we know that as we understand that the idols are nothing, and that everything of the Lord in the world is the Lord's. Okay. And that's why the food, all those things come from the Lord. All right. The lawful meats, the lawful foods, the fruits, vegetables, whatever. It all comes from the Lord for nourishment. Okay. And when you live in a pagan society, they would take these things and offer them to idols. But ultimately, a mature, okay, believer would know, okay, the earth is the Lord and everything in it. Okay. And then um let me see. I think that's look this up in a while. Yep. This is on Psalms 135. All right. In 15, it said, the idols of the heathen are silver and gold, the works of men's hand. They have mouths, but they speak not, eyes they have, but they see not. All right. They that make them are like unto them. So is everyone that trusted in them. Okay. So it was an understanding, all right, that these idols were nothing. Okay. You see? But you had those who were deeply involved into that, okay, and they were still, their conscience was still sensitive. They will be triggered, by these foods. Okay, so you had the mature believers who understood that these idols were nothing. Okay, and it didn't bother them to eat particular things and be in certain spots. All right, what you're going to go into, okay, the atmosphere that they was in, okay, their day-to-day reality, their practical lives that they had to deal with in circumstances, okay, and why this has to be addressed, okay, with those that were spiritually mature. Apostle Paul is letting them know, as we're going to read on, all right, that they had came to the conclusion that the idols were nothing. They was unbothered, by these things that other believers were bothered by. Okay, so for the well-being of the church, okay, 1 Corinthians 8:5 said, for though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many. Okay, and I think it's another one. Let me see. In Psalms, I used to bring out. Yep. Psalms 96:5. It said, for all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord, Yahweh Shah, made the heavens, okay, made the heavens. You see, Psalms 97:7, confounded be all they that serve graven images. They boast themselves of idols, worship him, all ye gods. Okay, so you have believers that had that understanding. Okay, they had matured to that understanding, but you have new believers coming in, and some believers come from different backgrounds. So, as a believer, as a fellow believer, you have to be considerate of these things. Okay, and this is one of the things that Apostle Paul is pushing for those, all right, that are not condemned in the conscience for doing particular things. Okay, it said, but to us there is but one power, the Father, whom are all things, and we in Him, and one Lord, Yahweh Shah Mashiach, by whom are all things, and we by Him. Howbeit, there is not in every man that knowledge. See, every believer hasn't come to their maturity yet. Okay, so this is what he's saying. Every believer, all right, hasn't come to their maturity. It said, however, not all believers know this. Some are accustomed to thinking of idols as being real. So when they eat the food that has been offered to idols, they think of it as the worship of real gods, and their weak conscience, okay, are violated. It's true that we can't win the Most High approval by what we eat. We don't lose anything if we don't eat it. We don't gain anything if we do. So he's bringing the balance to it. He like, look, some right don't have that understanding, haven't matured to that point yet. Okay, and they're still, they still feel violated by participating in those meats. Okay, it said, but you must be careful so that your freedom does not cause others with a weak conscience to stumble. For if others see you with your superior knowledge eating in the temple of the idol, won't they be encouraged to violate their conscience by eating food, all right, that has been offered, okay, to an idol? Okay, so eating the meat itself, okay, wasn't wrong, all right, but when you would do these things in front of particular believers, okay, that was weak, okay, when it came to that, then you can be guilty of causing them to violate, their conscience. Okay, so it's a thing of consideration. When you read this chapter, the main thing, okay, was consideration, and you know neither party, okay, is wrong, but it can become wrong if all right, you're doing something that offensive to someone's belief. They haven't came on the level yet. Okay, because hey, brothers, we have to come in. We have to be developed. And there's certain things, that even beyond food that newer brothers shouldn't see. You know, they haven't been built up. Because when someone comes in, it's about their foundation. Okay, they have to get the foundation be built up. While we came in, a lot of us, we had to withdraw. We had to go into a heavy isolation, be built up. Then we was able to maneuver with balance. As we would, reinsert ourselves back around particular things. Some things we cut it off for good. Some things, now we're able to deal with it now. All right. And don't be shaken in the spirit. Okay. It says, so because of your superior knowledge, a weak believer, all right, for whom Hamashiach died will be destroyed. And when you sin against other believers by encouraging them, okay, by encouraging them to do something they believe is wrong, you are sinning against, all right, Hamashiach. So if what I eat causes another believer to sin, I will never eat meat again as long as I live, for I don't want to cause another believer to stumble. And what he's pushing a mindset, is that he doesn't want to do anything to offend or cause, someone weak in the faith, to stumble at his actions. All right, just because he not condemned by it. Okay, you have to be considerate, of your brethren. Okay, and it go both ways, because when you go to Romans 14, and you want to get some history, all right, you go to Romans 14:1, it said, accept other believers who are weak in the faith and don't argue with them about what they think is wrong or right, because when newer brothers come in, their perspective is still immature. Okay, and you can guide them, all right, but you don't want to get into a heated, all right, discussion about what's right and what's wrong, with particular things, all right, because brothers got to go through experiences, brothers got to see certain things for themselves, and you see, he might think certain celebrities haven't sold out, and you know, he stick around, he gonna see. You might think this and think that, and he just has an inexperienced viewpoint. Okay, with the knowledge. Okay, and that don't mean every time you see him, you just gotta destroy him. Because you got superior knowledge of these things. You can put them on. All right, you can put them on to certain things and open them up, and humbly, show them different with particular things. Okay, but he's still young. All right, they're still young and weak in the faith. Okay, it said, for instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another believer with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables, man. Okay, so you have those that know, okay, dealing with the meat. You see, so they just start eating vegetables and try to avoid it. Okay, well, the person that eats anything, okay, and it's speaking of the lawful meats, okay, because this was going on all over the Greco-Roman Empire, not just in current, but all over the churches. They had to deal with this. Okay, just current, it had to be addressed. Okay, so whether you're eating meat, or just eating vegetables, or you got certain brothers today, they got certain diets. Some brothers, detox often. Some brothers never detox. Okay, that doesn't mean the brother that detox has to look down on the brother that doesn't, and the brother that doesn't detox doesn't have to look at the brother that does a certain way. Okay, none of someone detoxes and not detoxing doesn't make them superior. Okay, in the faith. Okay, brothers just got their own thing, their own regiment. Okay, and it's all under the banner within the liberty. Okay, of Yahweh Shai. It said those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't. And those who don't eat certain food must not condemn those who do, for the Most High has accepted them. Okay, so we're not here, for the petty, you know, tick for tack. You know, brother might eat, a sneaker, and you go crazy. you know, you bring up the video about the sneaker and how it's made and what where the cashews really come from. Like brother, chill. Brother just had a sneaker. Okay, it is what it is. You probably ain't had a sneaker in you know 8 years. It's cool. It's great. Okay, but you can't just destroy the brother. Okay, you brothers get around and talk about their diets and what they doing and but if a brother ain't on that, he just ain't on it. Okay, as long as he's eating lawful to the best of his ability and uh you know fulfilling his lot in the ministry, man. Hey, it is what it is. All right. Romans 14:4 said, "Who are you to condemn someone else's servants? Their own master will judge whether they stand or fall, and with the Lord's help, they will stand and receive his approval. In the same way, some think one day is more holy than another, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable, man. Because let's say you have believers and their faith drives them to do different things. There's certain high holy days that brothers reverence that other brothers don't. Because outside of the Passover and the Day of Atonement, everything else is optional if you want to do that. Some brothers they have they Sabbath feast every week with their family. Some brothers don't. They don't. You know that's not a make or break thing, whether you're doing it or not. Okay, they're just different brothers' spirit and stay faith. Okay, and it's all still acceptable either way. The ones that don't do it, the ones that do it, all right, it's still acceptable under Yahweh Shai. Okay, Yahweh Shai wasn't crucified for us to argue about, the technicalities of, high holy days and the technicalities of, a diet. You see, it said those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. Those who eat any kind of food do it to honor the Lord, since they give that thanks to the Most High before eating. And those who refuse to eat certain foods also want to please the Lord and give thanks to the Most High. For we don't live for ourselves or die, all right, for ourselves, man, because we all live, okay, to honor Yahweh Bashim Al Shai, okay, and we live for each other. You see, that's why you go here to Philippians, and then we'll go into some history. Let's go Philippians. Philippians 2. All right, this Philippians 2. And 1, it says, is there any encouragement from belonging? All right, is there any encouragement from belonging to a Messiah? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and one purpose. Okay, because we have a bigger agenda than you know uh, the specifics of a brother diet. You know, you see, we have bigger things. Okay, that we're unified. All right, on the same mission and the same purpose. Okay, it says don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others better than yourselves, man. Thinking of others, better than yourselves, man. Having a mind, being considerate towards your brother. Their weak points. You gotta know your brothers. You know, And brothers, as we, become a little more seasoned, we be mindful of younger brothers. Remember how we were, how impressionable we were. Okay, how we had certain viewpoints that were, you see, that just came from being immature in the faith. It's a balance of, guiding those younger brothers and tightening up on them when need be, and being firm with them in certain things. Okay, giving them room, to mature. Okay, within themselves. Okay, because we're here to serve Yahweh Shai, and the number one way we serve Yahweh Shai is serving each other. Okay, it said verse 4, don't only look for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. Okay, so we take an interest, in others too, and how we move. Okay, it affects others, man. You see, so we have to be mindful, and then we have to be selfless. Certain things, like if a brother is weak, in certain points, okay, there's a certain way to be around their brother. Okay, and just knowing that they're moving accordingly. You see, because even here, matter of fact, he brought this out in a while. This is I think this is Rock 37. Let me see. All right, so Rock 37 and 27 says, my son, prove thy soul and thy life, and see what is evil for it, and give not that unto it. For all things are not profitable for all men, neither have every soul pleasure in everything. You know? So as we live and learn, we prove ourselves and we understand, we begin to understand, okay, what's for us and what's not for us, man. Okay, what's for us in the faith, what's not for us, man. Some brothers excel in things that other brothers stumble at that will destroy other brothers. Okay, some brothers, have similarity. They're more tight knitted. Okay, some brothers, hey, they're just different. Okay, they on different ends of the spectrum, but it's all in Yahweh Shai. Okay, certain things that brothers can do, and I say it'll destroy the next brother. Okay, but that brother does well in it. It benefits his walk, and you see, and it's still within the liberty of Yahweh Shai. It's not going off. Okay, but everything ain't profitable for everybody. That's why one of the main tasks we have in this ministry is finding our gift, finding our always, and tapping into that. So yeah, it's different. Different setups amongst different brothers, different. Okay, everybody got their customized lot. And everybody built to fulfill. Okay, their assignment in Yahweh Shai. You see, so it's a thing of being like-minded. Okay, but also understanding the diversity. All right, that's in Yahweh Shai. Okay, so let's go here. Let's get into some more of this history. So you go here just to go into what they was dealing with. Is it this one? All right, so jumping down. Okay, so because remember you had Jake, that was servants to other men living in their master's house. okay, that was waking up, okay. So I asked, I said, will slaves and current have to depend on their masters for daily meals? Okay, was most meats and markets from temples of idols, were some temples likened to modern restaurants? Okay, so um, it said below is a historically grounded, clear explanation of slavery, food supply, and temples in ancient current, answering all your questions. It says, with slaves and current, all right, and current depend on their masters for daily meals. Yes, most slaves depended almost entirely on their masters for food. Okay, household slaves lived in their master's home, ate whatever the household provided, had no right to choose what was served, could be sent, okay, to markets or temples to collect food. Some slaves worked outside the home, craftsmen, accountants, shop attendants. Even then, their master still controlled their diet. They often ate leftover from the master's table. Some were given stipends, which they used to buy food, but this was not coming. Okay, so if you was a slave or you was a servant, okay, in your master's home, and you woke up to the truth, okay, well, you would still be eating those food, all right, that he would get from the markets, okay. He might have a little temple out back, so all right, but that was your daily, okay, that was your daily nourishment. Okay, and remember, it would be lawful foods, and they did offer unlawful foods as well. Okay, but the foods that you were able to eat, okay, as using their position, you was a believer, but you, okay, in another man's house as a servant, you had to eat what was presented. You would get the leftovers. Okay, every now and then you'll get a stipend to go get your own, but then where you gonna go get the food from? The markets. And where did that meat come from? Okay, the temples. If we're gonna go into it, says if a slave worked in or near a pagan temple, they may have eaten the food directly associated with pagan sacrifices. Most slaves had almost no control over their meals, making the food offered to idols issue especially relevant for them. Okay? So this is why Apostle Paul, like, look, these idols are nothing. And do what you gotta do. Okay? What you gonna do in that position, in that predicament? Okay? See, these letters were written to real believers in real situations, man. Okay, it said with most meat sold in the market from sacrifices made in temples. Yes, a large portion of the meat in the Greco-Roman cities, including current, okay, came from temple sacrifices. Okay, so it was even, say beyond current. All right, but in current, this is where it was addressed, heavily. It says a sacrificial system produced a lot of leftover over meat. In Greco-Roman religion, only part of the animal was burned for the gods. The rest went to priests, temple workers, and the public. The extra meat then went to temple dining rooms, feasts, public banquets, local markets. Okay? Temples were major economic centers. They function like butcheries, food distribution hubs, social clubs, catering services. So even if someone brought meat in a marketplace, there was a high likelihood it originally came from a sacrifice animal. Okay, which today the meats that we have access to, okay, these devils are putting idols upon everything. All these corporations have the satanic symbolism, and you know all these different things, man. These restaurants, okay, it was in the same situation they was in. It was just more blatant back then. Okay, and now they're just not telling you directly, okay, what these foods are offered to or sacrificed to, okay. But we understand, and it's another thing if this Apostle Paul address, you wouldn't go into the meat market just asking, okay, what is these lamb shanks? what God did these sacrifice to. You just go buy the food, pray over and eat it, man. Okay? And now if you was told, they came out and told you, okay, for conscience sake, you wouldn't eat it. You see? Because as a believer, then you had those non-believers, okay, they can say, this nigga he still worship pagan. He's still a pagan. Would you give the ministry a bad name? So for conscience sake, if you're told, okay, if you would have been told that these things were, this and that, sacrifice to this, and yeah, we just did that, then, okay, boom, you reject it, okay? Well, you wouldn't go in there in the market just asking, the butcher, what God was this sacrifice to, who, what they do with this, just went in there, got your meats and left, man. Okay, 1 Corinthians 8:10 it says, makes sense only because the majority of the meat was linked to rituals. All right, it says, yeah, most meat occurring was connected to idol sacrifices in some way. Okay, so were some temples in Corinth like modern restaurants? Absolutely. Many temples function very much like restaurant, banquet halls, and event venues. Okay, temple dining rooms. Said archaeology showed that temples in Corinth, all right, and other cities had multiple dining rooms, often 5 to 10, seating for small diners or large, okay, banquets, lounge style couches for eating, areas for cooking and serving. Okay, so these temples were like a Applebee's, Golden Corral, all right, Cheesecake Factory. You see, they had that type of set within them. Okay, certain restaurant. These are nothing but modern temples of idols, man. Okay, it's a Greek spot down here. I ain't been to in a while, but it's called Zeus. That's the name of the Greek spot. Okay, with Ishmael and Elam. You see? So come on, man. You like, what you gonna do? Okay. It says temples hosted, hold on, birthdays, business meetings, gal banquets, all right, wedding and family events, civic celebration, private dinner parties, restaurant-like meals where people simply pay for dinner. Okay, the same setup, the same purpose of these restaurants today. Okay, your job might have, a banquet. You see, you know, and you don't have to go. But if you do go, okay, then it's cool. Pray over if they have lawful food, eat what you can eat. Pray over your food and be done. You know, it said for many Romans, temple dining was not seen as religious every time, was a normal social event, was a major part of civic life. This is why Paul had to clarify eating meat sold from market was one thing. Okay, eating inside a temple, all right, and they were still being invited. So imagine if you was invited, you know, your cousins, they ain't seen you, they want you to come out to, this certain restaurant. Okay, you understand the idolatry behind the restaurant. Okay, well, the Apostle Paul, like, look, you can go and eat what's lawful. Okay, but if they come out and telling you that this has been offered to this and we finna do this ritual to this and then we're gonna, nah, then you won't participate. Okay, but if it's just a little outing, your people invited you out. Okay, they reserve certain part of the temple slash restaurant, and they just wanted to eat, and okay, you can go or not go. But either way, Apostle Paul was saying if you do go, you're not going off. Okay, now if you, okay, let's say you come into the truth and your cousin, you've been in the truth 4 years and your cousin, He comes in, he's a month in, you know. Yeah, y'all both, invited to Thanksgiving. Now he is freshly in and he's still, you know, sensitive. His conscience is still sensitive. He got that zeal. He don't want to go. Well, for his consideration, hey, don't go with him. Both of y'all go do something together. Okay? Y'all gonna do a live stream and then y'all go fellowship for his conscience sake. So he can be built up. Okay? But if your wife family have a dinner, he don't know nothing about it, they have a dinner at a restaurant, you and your wife go, well, that's cool. Go do that. And I'm just throwing real life scenarios out to show what Apostle Paul was saying. Okay? Because I'm a brother that, I don't do that. I don't go to the Thanksgiving and, the Christmas, with the family. But I can't look at a brother a certain way that he go eat with his family on Thanksgiving. That's him. I don't do it. I don't want to be around it. Okay. But that don't mean that I can look down on the brother that does that. Okay. Now you throw a brother that's weak into the faith and somehow he can be, with certain things, and that's what it comes with, sacrificing, man. Sometimes you gotta sacrifice and do particular things for the sake of others, man, out of love. So yeah, that's the point. Just wanted to bring that out. Lord will, you brothers, all right, and you sisters are edified. Once again, I want to give all praise and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash, and double honors unto the apostles and the elders of GMS who rule well, teach well, being great example to us younger brothers, and peace and blessings, salutations, hopefully, shalom.